it still matters, and why the UK can play a role and should play a role in the Western Balkans. So I'll ask Dame Karen to speak to us. There'll be plenty of time for questions. We finish sharp at 5 o'clock, but those with the time very welcome to join us for a drink downstairs afterwards. So over to you, Karen.
Great, well thank you very much, David, and David's right, we've worked together on many occasions on this complicated but fundamentally very hard to let go of agenda. The one thing I would say, if I may, where I take issue with you slightly, even in the opening sentence, is that I think the British public do care very much about the Western Balkans. Prior to Ukraine, it was the major foreign policy issue of its day, and for a very long time. Srebrenica, whose sad 30th anniversary we commemorate this month, was the worst massacre in Europe since the end of the Second World War. And the Dayton anniversary, whose 30th commemoration is also this year, was seen by very many people, and I would argue still was, a triumph of diplomacy, particularly American diplomacy, given all the efforts that had gone before, and the triumph of Dick Holbrooke in particular. And I mention that because I do think one of the reasons that compels the government still to engage with the Western Balkans, whereas it would be a valid policy choice to leave it to the European Union, is precisely because of this long-standing connection, this feeling that when Yugoslavia broke up, we in the West collectively didn't get it right. We didn't get it right in many ways, but I will just leave you with the thought that it actually, the way the UN dealt with Bosnia in the early days pre-Dayton, fundamentally changed the nature of UN peacekeeping forever. And if you think of the dual key that the UN did not turn in order to authorize the airstrikes to stop the advancing army going to Srebrenica, then I think you begin to get some sense of the scale of what we all dealt with at that time. And of course, since then, we've had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the 21st century has become much more complicated and unpredictable than even the last few years of the 20th. But if you like, I think in a way, collapse of former Yugoslavia was something everybody could understand. People had been to Dubrovnik. There were more familiar sights on people's TV screens, and the Russians were working with us. But just as Ukraine is very important to the stability and security of Europe, I think people have come to remember that so are the Western Balkans countries. And I'm going to, if the ambassador doesn't mind, I'm going to include Albania in this list, just because it's a useful shorthand, but apologies to anyone who doesn't like the label. So I think there are very good reasons of history, and the British government at the moment is really determined to lean in, partly for those reasons of history, and partly because Tony Blair played such a prominent role, along with Bill Clinton, in the air conflict and the air war over Kosovo in 1999, and was instrumental in shaping the peace that followed. So I think all those things are one reason why the British public does care, and anyone who was at St Paul's Cathedral for the commemoration of Srebrenica, and Ambassador, you and I were there, and 2 members of the presidency from Bosnia and Herzegovina were there, will have seen a very strong affinity coming from the British people. So that's one set of reasons. I think the other set of reasons is a bit more prosaic, less strategic in a way, though still relevant. The Western Balkans countries have always been vulnerable to Russian disinformation, Russian meddling. The Russians tried to foment a coup in Montenegro not so long ago. with the renewed focus on what the Russians have done and are doing in Ukraine, and the vulnerability not just of Ukraine but also of Moldova, we think of the Western Balkans also as being a very vulnerable region to a whole range of Russian hybrid attacks, whether that's cyber, whether it's corruption, whether it's trying to suborn politicians, and of course there is huge dependency on Russian energy. So for those reasons as well, the Western Balkans is very important to the British and EU governments. And it's interesting that Ukraine, or the fact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has somewhat changed the dynamic within the European Union on enlargement. I think if you looked at 10 or so years ago, you would have found more ambivalence among the EU about another wave of enlargement. And now I think, because of the strategic picture that the invasion of Ukraine has thrown out, that calculation is different. But I think there's a risk there, if I may say so, for the countries of the Western Balkans. This is a window of opportunity, and the window will not be there forever. If there's a pause in Ukraine, and attention will naturally go to the latest peace agreement, money and attention will flow to Ukraine and Moldova, and we don't want the Western Balkans to be squeezed out. So if I may make the suggestion, I think now is the time for the Western Balkans leaders really to capitalise on this mood within the European Union and make progress towards EU accession. And just to say, I say EU accession because this is something that the countries of the region, the citizens of the countries of the region say they want. It's not us trying to impose an outcome. Certainly it couldn't be the Brits trying to say you must join the European Union after Brexit, but it is a future that we very much support, and I'll come on later as to what we're doing to try and help with that. And 3 countries of the region, of course, are already NATO members, and I'll come on to how we work closely there. So there's some very good security reasons that are directly relevant to the United Kingdom, NATO, and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area. On the other side of the ledger, I think you have all the difficult issues like migration and organised crime. We have recently, the Prime Minister paid the first ever visit to Albania by a Prime Minister. Lots to do with Albania on illicit finance, on trafficking, on the routes through Albania to the rest of Europe, including the UK. And he signed an enhanced partnership with Edi Rama to try and tackle some of these things. And we don't necessarily have the bulk of migrants coming from the Western Balkans to the UK, though it is a staging post for migrants, illegal migration going into other parts of Europe. But those routes are used one way or another for trafficking, for organised crime. And so it's very much in the United Kingdom's national security interest as well as international security that we try and do something to tackle that. And then I think the last area I point to as to why continuing to engage and invest in the Western Balkans is important to the UK is growth. Now, with the greatest respect, the Western Balkans region is not going to be our largest trading partner, and we're not going to be yours. But it all helps stability and prosperity in Europe. You have some really talented people, you have some very interesting natural resources, and you have something to contribute to the future prosperity of Europe. And we would like to work with you on that. You also have, particularly in North Macedonia, some very important links to the NATO routes. They're called Corridor 8, Corridor 10, Corridor 11. So there's lots of interesting collaboration there. And we can help I think with a general approach that the Brits have in their DNA about the importance of free trade, free enterprise, open markets, at a time when the rest of the world is, to be absolutely honest, including the place I've just come from, rather closing in on itself on trading matters. The fact that we are ready to champion open trade, including with the countries of the region, I think is really helpful. So what are we doing and why are we helpful? I think being outside the European Union, to be honest, we can see things in a slightly different way, in a way closer to the countries, perhaps, of the Western Balkans. And we can hopefully advise those countries on which parts of EU accession are the real enablers and the really important parts to concentrate on, and we can help you hopefully with skill sets and capabilities. And I was very interested on coming here, David, to find out from one of your colleagues that you also have the British, is it enterprise experience?
British Expertise International.
Expertise International. Possibly there would be something there where we could all collaborate. So I think that's important. Partly, as I say, we feel an affinity with some of the citizens, human rights, women's rights, being able to have more emphasis on the rule of law. We see that as a particular USP where the British government can help. And we just have a new gender equality envoy in Baroness Harriet Harman, who we hope will be able to spend some time in the Western Balkans. On the security side, we've been working very closely with the three members on Ukraine. Albania, for example, takes part in the training programme that the Brits do of Ukrainian fighters in the UK. The others, North Macedonia and Montenegro, are also leaning in on Ukraine and are ready to play a role in their own region. Now, David and others will remember a time when we actively did not want peacekeepers from the region to play a role in the region, but that has now changed, and now it's extremely welcome. And we're working very hard with those three countries on defence industry. On the growth side, I don't know how many of you might have a business background, but if you talk to UK Export Finance, they are really keen to engage more in the Western Balkans and have done some great work with financing, particularly infrastructure in North Macedonia. So if any of you do have business connections, please rush home and get them to ring Tim Reed in UK Export Finance, because there's money there and it's ready to be used for the Western Balkans. So I think that's a very important way that the UK can help. And I think I'm right in saying that no other country in Europe is offering that at the moment. Obviously, the European Union is offering more money through its growth plan, through its accession chapters, and we obviously can't compete with that. But we can do targeted help, and we can help with the individual programs. And one thing I took part in recently in Montenegro was the cultural festival, where there is already a lot of assistance for each other across borders, because if you have a filming unit coming, you have creative industries, the shot from the other side of the mountain might look better than the shot from your side of the mountain. So you obviously want to be able to collaborate with your neighbours to make the most of that and ensure that the next time someone makes Lord of the Rings, they don't need to go all the way to New Zealand to make it. And the scenery of the country for anyone, of the countries for anyone who has not visited, is truly spectacular. And there may well be some very great opportunities there. And all of these, as David mentioned, are going to come together this year in something called the Berlin process. Angela Merkel set up the Berlin process in 2014, partly because she was worried that enlargement was not moving fast. And she wanted to both enable the countries of the region to cooperate among themselves on public policy, but she also wanted it to eventually become a support mechanism for EU enlargement. And so we're very pleased to be hosting the Berlin process this year. It's part of the government's reset with the European Union, and we've been working very closely with Germany on the three themes of security, growth, migration and organised crime. But even better, if you like, than government-to-government cooperation, there's a lot of cooperation among civil society, a lot of cooperation among youth groups. There's actually a secretariat in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina called the Regional Cooperation Council that pulls many of these themes together, and we're going to be particularly concentrating on trade, trying to get freer and faster trade links across the region and into the European Union, recognition of ID cards right the way across the region, ditto of educational qualifications which will enable job seeking. And if I may say so, and if I may make an appeal through the ambassadors who are here, I think there's more that the leaders of all political parties could do to get on board with some of these ideas. Some of them, I'm sorry to say, are not new. They've been with us for several years, but they haven't been implemented. So we would make a particular plea to the governments of the region to make this year a full implementation. Very happy to stop there and answer any questions you may have.
Well, Karen, thank you very much for that very clear reminder of why the Western Balkans matters to the UK, and I don't think there's a lot about it in our annual survey this year, but I suspect the principles behind that will come out very clearly. I must thank you for giving such a very unexpected and warm advertisement for British Expertise International, our sister organisation which helps British companies to operate around the world in what we call hard and social infrastructure, so education, skills, training, governance, a whole lot of things beyond hard infrastructure. We have over the years worked quite a bit in the Western Balkans region and are always keen to do so. I thought was one thing that struck me as how very interesting, and a contrast perhaps from when you and I first started working on the region, some really good practical initiatives that you mentioned there, recognition of ID cards, educational qualifications and so on, things that really can make a practical, not terribly kind of diplomatic and political difference, but a very practical difference to people's lives. So good luck with that. I'd like to ask one question myself before opening up, and that is, the Berlin process is fundamentally a European process. There are a lot of countries in the world which have relations of one kind or another with countries in the Western Balkans region, and countries in the region are not restricted to only dealing with Europe. Are there possibilities for the Berlin process or for the UK to work with some of those other countries in the region too?
Yes, there are, but they're not as well codified, if you like. The Berlin process, as you say, is very much a European venture. It's the EU institutions plus 10 friends of the Western Balkans, the UK being one. Countries like Norway also take part, and of course Turkey is a huge investor in the Western Balkans, and not just in the Islamic majority countries, which is very welcome. But obviously, as you will all have noticed, Turkey is assuming a greater and greater role on the world stage. So it's incumbent on us to work with Turkey and share common goals and common roots. So we do a lot of that. You have the United States, which has of course been instrumental in the past on the Western Balkans. I think the Trump administration is still working out its approach, but you've had some very strong statements from Secretary Rubio about the direction of travel, and we still have those international groupings that real historians on the Western Balkans will remember. The Quint, that is still going. That's a way for us all to get together in the transatlantic to coordinate our approach and share policy prescriptions. I've mentioned Russia, I haven't mentioned China. China is a big investor, particularly in Serbia. Very interesting investor, doing a lot on the mining side, as you'd expect, on the infrastructure side, and of course, whatever help the EU gives to the region on easier exporting into the EU, then of course third countries will expect to be able to take advantage of that. And from an economic perspective, the more investment the better, but there will be EU procurement rules that will need to be adhered to.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to open up for questions. I think we have a roving microphone, so there's a gentleman with his hand up there first, and then another gentleman there, another one there, and the ambassador, so that's 4. Mine's the roving microphone.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Ewan Grant, UK Defence Forum. I worked in the EU Capel mission in Sarajevo and Banja almost contiguous with Paddy Ashton's
right.
I then went to Ukraine, which is another saga, I'm afraid. My question is about using British cooperation and assistance, and let's be honest, assistance as well, to feed into closer cooperation with the EU, and then backwards into a virtuous circle, particularly on the migration and strategic aspects of organised crime. I would refer to the article, I think it's the Telegraph or the Times this morning, comments highly favourable to the UK made by the military head of NATO's transformation team. I'm particularly interested in that. And I haven't read it yet, but I have downloaded the pre-sample of the latest Gerald Seymour from a few months ago, which is set in Albania. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Should we take a couple together? And the gentleman there, yes, please.
Hello, thank you so much for your comments, found them fascinating. I wanted to ask you about what one of the comments you made earlier on about the fact that we got the conflict in the 1990s wrong. And I was wondering if you could state exactly what you think, exactly how we got that wrong, and exactly what the lesson was from that, because I think it would be very easy, and has been very easy for people to draw the wrong conclusions from that. For example, to make a sort of generalised lesson that intervention will always be necessary and correct, and especially as we are contemplating the possibility of another regime change war in Iran. Could you sort of clarify exactly what a more sort of prudent lesson than that which maybe Tony Blair articulated in his Chicago speech might be?
Thanks. Should we take this quite big questions
together?
together?
They are quite big questions, the second one in particular. So I try and answer your first one. I think you're absolutely right. It's part of the UK's USP that we can offer a lot of help on the defence and security side, both in a practical way, NATO training, NATO equipment, but also in a more philosophical way, how do you craft a national and international defence policy. And then I did see the comments from the Transformation General, and that was complimentary, and I think there's definitely something the UK can offer Europe in that respect, and I think the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary brought this out very well in their recent negotiation with the European Union, and we're ready to put that at the disposal of our friends and partners in the Western Balkans. The Berlin process is pretty nitty-gritty, I'm afraid. It was deliberately designed, as David said, to be very public policy focused, things that really help the lives of ordinary citizens. But from HMG's perspective, and particularly as we're doing the Berlin process in the year of so many important anniversaries, we would like to raise sights a little bit higher and think about the strategic, think about reconciliation, are there lessons from Northern Ireland, etc. But yes, there's a very good feedback loop, and also at NATO, lots of ways in which we can work individually with the countries and contemplate what we can do more to help those countries who've not yet joined NATO and would like to do so. I think your question is a very long answer, which David won't let me give, and that's probably just as well. I went to the recent anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement in Dayton, Ohio, back in May, and I was on a panel with people who'd been there, like Colbilt and Chris Hill and Wes Clark. So I tried my hands at some general lessons afterwards, because I couldn't compete with them, and got roundly told off and told I was wrong. So I don't think I'm wrong though. I think it really did change the nature of UN peacekeeping. And for a while, if you like, the international mood was for intervention. There wasn't just the Blair Chicago speech, there was the Brahimi report for the United Nations on intervention. And intervention at the time, and for quite a long time afterwards, was seen as having been a success in Bosnia, which is one reason why it was repeated over Kosovo, and one reason why you saw a very heavy EU and NATO civilian presence helping North Macedonia. And why we were able eventually to set up international structures in these countries. But you'll notice that we've not repeated the model of OHR since. It was such an unusual model. It was born mainly out of frustration at what the UN had not been able to do in Bosnia. So it was a pretty unique time. And since then, any international intervention, peacekeeping has tended to follow the UN model on the civilian side, but not when you need robust peacekeeping or peace enforcing actually on the ground. And that's why you've seen coalitions of the willing, whether that's Afghanistan, whether it's Iraq. So there is now a big difference, and I think probably that difference is correct, given the capabilities you need to actually be able to make a difference in security on the ground. But whether or not I draw wider lessons about intervention, I think that's really hard and deserves a much bigger conversation than we have time for today. So maybe David would be kind enough to schedule that. I also think it's probably a conversation best done on Chatham House rules, to be honest, because everybody has different experiences. What I would say is that it really made us think about the dictum that you should never go into something without knowing how you're going to get out of it. That's one dictum. And then the other one, which we also have not always stuck to, is it's a matter of end states that's important, not end dates. Otherwise the Taliban just sit there and wait you out. So there's quite a few lessons to be gleaned from that. But I think overall it's a mistake to draw too many templates. Each situation needs assessing on its merits against probably some quite strict criteria. If you're interested though in how Kosovo all unfolded, I think we did a memorandum for the Foreign Affairs Committee at the time, which should be in the library of the House of Commons.
Thank you. Just prompts me to think, there's a very good book which I've just been reading by Andrew Lickerman, who used to be the Dean, I guess, of the London Business School. It's called Judgment at Work. And it's all about the commercial world, but actually it's the kind of judgment that you need to apply your experience in each specific case in foreign policy, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Reading that book at the moment, I think it's something diplomats could usefully read.
Yes,
That wasn't intended for me. Gentleman here, I think, and then the ambassador. Was it you? I think you were.
Yeah.
Question. Yes.
James from UNHCR. During the Prime Minister's visit to Albania, the European Political Community Summit, there was a lot of reporting at the time about the idea of migration return hubs in the Western Balkans. I was wondering if you could expand on the topic and if any announcements are expected for the London Summit coming up.
Ambassador, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador Kabiti. I would say that most of the countries in Western Balkans, they're looking at the British leadership in the region, most of them. And I was wondering, do you think that UK should move more forward rather than agreeing with quick countries? You should look critically at the decision made by the quick countries and influence they have in the region. And secondly, you mentioned China investment in Western Balkans. Frankly, I think it should be rather IMF or EBRD or any other Western organization rather than China, which we know how it ends up by cheap money that they invest in states. Thank you.
On the first point, I think there's a general understanding that illegal migration is an international problem and one needs to talk to international and regional partners about how best to tackle it. But I'm going to copy the Prime Minister and say, as he did, we're not going to offer a running commentary on the various ideas that we're pursuing with a whole range of countries. But there are some good things in the pipeline. For example, the number of small boats that are linked to Albania dropped by over 90% in 1 year. So the cooperation we have with Albania has been working extremely well, and when the Prime Minister saw Edi Rama, that came over. So it's a continuous thing, and the Home Office in particular have it as one of their priorities. I think your question is much harder, Ambassador. I think I would say that in the last 10 years or so, and I used to think this when I was at the UN, the West rather took its eye off what China was doing economically overseas. And we didn't have an interesting enough or a comprehensive enough offer, especially in infrastructure, to countries who then wanted to join Belt and Road. But actually, if you look at the mechanics of that in Chinese investment, a lot of the time it gets developing countries deeper into debt. The buildings are not always robust, and there are various other problems to do with, are they actually setting up local businesses that employ local people? But I think we just weren't fast enough off the mark as the West to think, hang on a minute, we could make a better offer here. I think that realisation is now there. Certainly in the British system, we transformed one of our development financing corporations so that we could better tackle this. It's called British Infrastructure Investment. President Biden set up something not dissimilar, which is Partnerships on Global Initiative. A number of countries have attached themselves to that. I think we wait to see whether President Trump will want to take that forward or will want to have a different idea. And there are many more international conversations about debt, including in the IFIs and in EBRD. So I haven't got a solution to offer you, but I think we're on the case, and I think over the next couple of years you'll see a much more energetic Western response.
First question?
Sorry.
It was another question.
Sorry, just remind me.
It was about quit countries and looking critically what they're doing, particularly in Kosovo. Rather than agreeing with them, sort of telling, for instance, Kosovo is the only country that has measures which are sanctions, and is the only sort of way that quit countries, if they come up saying that this is not just. And what I'm saying is, rather than agreeing with them, I think, do you think that UK should look critically at that and disagree rather than agreeing?
I'd be a pretty bad diplomat, Ambassador, if I were to reveal internal disagreements among the group of countries. I take your point because the audience may not know that Kosovo is under certain measures from the European Union that are proving very hard to change. But I'm not part of the European Union, so I can't comment on that. So I think that's one of those things where you'll get further if we talk about it quietly and try and find a way through in private, to be absolutely honest.
There's a lady there, yes, and the lady next to her, so that's two easily together there. Let's take those two, please.
Thank you. Well, I will introduce us together because we both work for GCSI, Government Communication Service International, based in the Cabinet Office, and we both work in the Western Balkans. I have a question regarding the role of public opinion. We know that the enlargement process, the EU enlargement process, depends in great part from political decisions, and obviously there will be worry in European capitals about the perception that at a time where migration is an issue, that we will be welcoming within the EU other countries, and in the UK where there is skepticism, as probably true across the world for kind of development and the role that we play in that. How can we better tell the stories of the benefits of development, of enlargement, and continued support, including by the UK in countries like Kosovo? How can we better tell those stories as communicators and as diplomats? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the lady.
Thank you. A similar question. What do you think the biggest barriers are to EU accession in the region? Do you think they're domestic in the country, it's about reforms, or do you think it's more about what we saw in 2019 with the diplomatic issues? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think there's a lot of public, subject to correction by the ambassadors, I think there's a lot of public support, ordinary citizens' support for both NATO and EU accession by their countries. So I don't think it's an occasion where you have a democratic deficit in that respect. I think in Bosnia and Herzegovina ambassador it's about 85%. I think it would be less in Serbia, say, and obviously and understandably Serbia has a different view of NATO accession than many of her neighbours. Nevertheless,
Sorry, I meant in European capitals and in London, skepticism within public opinion in European capitals and London for the benefits of this development.
I don't think there's skepticism in the UK because it's not really for us to say anymore. There is, on the contrary, overwhelming support within the UK for NATO and for welcoming new countries into NATO and making NATO stronger and better able to help the countries of Europe resist the malign forces that are coming from Russia. As I said in the opening talk, I think there was an ambivalence at some point in the EU about further enlargement. I think the geostrategic picture having changed with Ukraine, that ambivalence is no longer there, which is why I think there's a window of opportunity that I think or would encourage leaders and people in the region to really seize, because I don't think that window can be there forever. So now is a great time to be making progress, and I think that goes to your question. If I may say so, we would like to see more momentum behind the practical steps that have to be taken in order to get into the EU. NATO is slightly different because it obviously concentrates on defence and security capabilities, whereas the EU covers the waterfront of reform from economic to human rights to rule of law to independent judicial systems, etc., etc. I would, and I'm on record as having said this, I would in all honesty like to see more political momentum given to this in the countries of the region. And I'd appeal to all political leaders. I think if you take your country, if I may, Ambassador, the big problem there is Republika Srpska and the president of Republika Srpska. There is no reason to fear a loss of Bosnian Serb identity if Bosnia and Herzegovina joins the European Union. There are plenty of models in Europe, Belgium is one, Switzerland another, where you can have a very decentralised system. But obviously, no country in the region can get into the European Union except as a state. So all the leader of Republika Srpska is doing is denying his own citizens the ability to be part of Europe and to share in the economic benefits that that brings. So I think the primary problem, I'm sorry to say, is domestic, it's not external.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? There's a gentleman there and the lady in the front. So gentleman there was first. So
Just picking up on that that last point you made, we in Bosnia and Herzegovina there is still obviously at least a political conflict which has not been resolved since Dayton and so on. And between Serbia and Kosovo, we still see a political and also sometimes a security conflict, a regional security conflict. So conflict resolution is a key element, and perhaps we haven't really talked so much about that today. I welcome your views. In the last 20 years, my view is it hasn't moved on as much as some of us who were engaged in that process 20 years ago would have hoped. What's your view for the next, well, the prospects?
thank you. And lady in front.
Sorry, forgive me, this isn't so much a question as a straight plug. I made a series 30 years ago called The Death of Yugoslavia about the rise of Milosevic, and then later one on reform Milosevic, which the BBC is repeating from the 8th of July as the anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre. But I wonder, as this will go out on BBC 4 late at night, and only I hope people like you are fascinated by the Western Balkans will be switching on. Why do the problems of the Balkans? I mean, we were all. It was the Ukraine invasion 30 years ago, and now there are people on the street in Serbia that are more than on the 5th of October that brought Milosevic down, and yet it barely hits the news agenda. And I wonder why you think that is, and what perhaps we could do about it.
There was a comment at the Dayton commemoration in Ohio that I think was very interesting, and somebody said that we made good progress immediately after Dayton for 10 years, and then it started to stall. Not always easy to know why, and likewise we've had good progress in Serbia-Kosovo normalisation before, now started to stall, but we had the 2023 agreement. I think, the proximate cause is that political leaders are not implementing the agreements they've signed up to, and obviously that needs to happen. But what underlies that, what makes these things go in peaks and troughs, I think is much, much harder to discern, and why the region of the Western Balkans still struggles to integrate into the rest of Europe when Romania and Bulgaria did. And if you look at the progress that a country like Indonesia or Malaysia has made in 20 years, what is it that we're collectively not doing to bring all of that to fruition in the region of the Western Balkans? And I don't think the answer can solely be the awfulness of the conflict 30 years ago, in all honesty, because you can find examples right the way around the world, including in Europe, of where equally terrible conflicts have been overcome, Usually they've been overcome because political leaders took a risk. One thinks of Chancellor Schmidt kissing the ground and talking about a human response. So we obviously collectively haven't found out yet what that is in the Western Balkans. When we host the Berlin process in October, one of the things we do want to do with David Lammy's meeting, with the Foreign Secretary's meeting, is look more closely at reconciliation and what would it take to unlock the implementation of some of these commitments. So if it's helpful, maybe when we've had the Berlin process, here's another commercial, if you'd like us to come back,
We'd love you to.
and it doesn't have to be me, could be my colleague Mia, could be the head of our Berlin process, Will Middleton. If you'd like us to come back and go through what we did and whether or not you think that's met the test, very happy to do that. And I mean, yes, I agree. It's a fascinating, in a way. It's an all-consuming subject, and I hope lots of people watch your documentary, and we'll obviously be getting the next generation in the Foreign Office who aren't as old as me and David to watch it.
Absolutely. Any further questions? We've probably got time for one or two. I'm going to ask a question in the meantime, which may be slightly unfair. It's not difficult. It's not sensitive, but it might be slightly unfair. But you know the region well. You travel around it regularly. Which bits of UK PLC, whether it's business or universities or other organisations, would you like to kind of grab by the scruff of the neck and say you ought to look at doing more in the region, whichever country in the region it might be, or more?
There's a question in my mind as to whether the countries of the region could be more like Estonia in terms of how they embrace new technology in AI. I haven't done that study, so I don't know if that's promising. But certainly small countries can be very agile in public policy making, so I'd be interested to see that. I do think there's more we can do collaborating on universities, and that's one of the things we'll try and have a look at through the Berlin process. British business, it's just not automatically a region where the majority of British business would find it advantageous to be, and that's not a criticism, it's just in the nature of things. But there is some very good business to be done in niche areas around infrastructure and corridors, and this is why UK Export Finance, who are the only bit of government, when I asked them if they'd like more money, said no, they've got enough. So that suggests to me it's not being fully used. And that's not UKEF's fault, who are doing a great job, but I do think that's something we could look at.
I'd agree. Any final questions for Dame Karen? Oh, there's one there.
If I could, sorry, yeah, Chris Hughes, LSE. I'm trying to formulate this question because it's a bit complex. I mean, a lot of what you said would have made great sense a year ago, but suddenly we're sort of plunged into this new geopolitics, which is very realist and sort of state pursuing their own interests, playing balance of power. And it's not so much about the UK or the EU, but the countries in the Balkans, the states, whether they can buy or should buy into that, because we've heard sort of a lot of scepticism about China, which is fully understandable. But on the other hand, doesn't that give them leverage to drive a harder bargain with the EU or the UK? So I mean, to what degree can the states in the region sort of buy into the new world geopolitics? I hope that makes sense.
I would say, having looked at the rise of Turkey in recent years, it's not just in the past year that different view of how one crafts or characterises one's national security has happened. I think it's been there for a while, and if you look at how Turkey was able over Syria to both contest Russia and cooperate in different areas. So I suspect we've been entering a more fluid period for a while. I don't know how the EU would view increased China investment that was only economic and not coming with political strings. But I suspect this is where size matters. I suspect the EU would think that if the countries of the Western Balkans wanted to join the EU, then they should be applying already EU public procurement rules and other regulations, including to Chinese investment. And I come back to the point that it is the citizens of each country that say they want EU and NATO integration. It's not something imposed on them, but as we all know, there are choices in that path, and it can bring huge benefits, but it's a bit like free trade itself. Domestically, it doesn't please everybody.
Thank you. And Karen, thank you very much indeed. You've given us a brilliant reminder of why the Western Balkans matters to the UK, and lots of thoughts on what the UK can do in the region. If by some chance the public profile of this question is not quite as high as it should be, I think the Berlin process in London this year can do a lot to rectify that. We would love to take you up on your generous offer, very generous offer, to return in one form or another after the summit to take stock and to keep the profile of the Western Balkans region high in the UK. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody, ambassadors, everyone, for coming today, and we look forward to the next round. Karen, thank you so much.